Welcome to the Volpe Report podcast, the state's premier public affairs show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians. I'm your host, Chuck Volpe. Join us now as we speak to this week's guest.
The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is brought to you by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We welcome back to our show our most regular guest, United States Congressman Dan Meuser of the 9th Congressional District. To refresh your recollection, Dan sits on some of the most important committees in the United States House of Congress, including, and for this show very importantly, the Committee of Oversight and Investigations. So Dan has an in-depth and classified briefing knowledge of the largest fraud in American history that's been perpetrated in Minnesota. A fraud that was allowed to happen effectively, or at least benignly neglected to happen by their loathsome Democratic governor, Tim Walz, who has already announced that he will not seek re-election, properly so. And the only other thing that needs to be done is he should announce his resignation. But that's a show for another day. What we will discuss on today's show is the violent and bloody protests in Minneapolis and what can only be described as a civil war actually occurring on American soil.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Congressman, first of all, Happy New Year. And second of all, welcome back to the Volpe Report. Look, my most frequent guest. It's not even close now. Dan Meuser, you've been there in the beginning when you were an erstwhile candidate for Congress back in 2018, 8 years ago, believe it or not, and have been on many times ever since. So welcome back again as we kick off 2026.
Well, Happy New Year to you, Chuck, your family, all your team there and your staff. And thank goodness for your telling it like it is, always doing your homework, always having the facts, and delivering it in a very, frankly, direct and patriotic manner. So it's a well-watched and appreciated show.
Dan, thank you so much. And having said that, my progressive Democratic elite friends, leftists, aren't going to enjoy this show. So talk about telling it like it is. And before we get to that, which is the meat of the show, I have to stop for a moment. You know I'm an avid sports fan, as you are. Last night, of course, was the college football national championship game between Indiana, of all teams, the most losing program in over 100 years. The last bowl win they had was 35 years ago, and that was a lousy bowl. And, of course, they've never won a national championship, which they finally accomplished last night. And they beat a really great Miami team in one of the great games I've ever seen. It was a wonderful game. But the reason I bring it up is during the national anthem, when and there were no protests, thankfully, and no demonstrations, and no one kneeled. They were, during the anthem, the camera spanned the crowd. 80 or 85, 90,000 people in Hard Rock Cafe Stadium, the old Joe Robbie, home of the Miami Dolphins. And they stopped for a moment on a box with a big glass window in front of it. Looking out on the game in the box was President Donald Trump and his family standing there, probably about 12 of them. And as he looked around, you could hear a deafening roar. The entire stadium gave him an overwhelming ovation. And you could hear it going on for about 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3. I don't need to see any polls about what's going on in this country and what the president's doing and where he stands in people's hearts and minds. I saw it firsthand in one of the most watched shows. That entire stadium gave him an ovation. That's the only poll I need for what Donald Trump is currently and where he sits in the public mind's eye in America.
Yeah. You know, people know that he's fighting for them. And he's fighting for America, right? They may not appreciate those quote unquote mean tweets or certain tactics, but they always know where his heart is, where his mind is. And I've said many times, he has one special interest, and that's the strength and prosperity of as many Americans as possible, if not all. And I will just add this, this morning, I missed most of I was getting the game on my phone. I was traveling, but I was fortunate enough to catch the last 4 or 5 minutes of it. It was tremendous. But on the news shows this morning, on the general media that I try to scan in the mornings, I'm getting ready. Not once did they portray anything like that. And frankly, they're just really about. And that's why I love your show so much. I mean, 90%, 95% of the media just portrays things in the worst possible light possible. If it's good news, they don't portray it. If it's bad news, it makes a headline. And of course, they didn't show anything like that. In fact, they showed a couple of anti-American protests this morning. Nothing positive. It's just a shame, because I do believe there's a good portion of people out there, no offense, but to those that are getting brainwashed, but are brainwashed by this constant manipulation of the facts, of the news, so-called news, by mainstream media.
I've cited this movie before, one of my favorites, The Matrix. If you remember the Matrix movie with Keanu Reeves and all that. And the whole premise of the movie is that people were actually living in a simulated reality that wasn't real. They were all hooked up to some machine. And I make that analogy because you could literally make the case that many people live in a matrix. They're going through their lives, and the reality that's presented to them by the legacy media, Dan, isn't real. It's not. Yeah. Do you remember during the summer George Floyd protests, they did the chop zone or whatever they called it in Seattle? And for about a week and a half, they had effectively, with government acquiescence, naturally a Democratic blue woke administration in Seattle, in the state of Washington, they allowed these gangs, thugs, to effectively take control of about 4 city blocks. And they said mostly peaceful. And then other stories started to emerge. 2 children were murdered during that peaceful. They didn't even talk about it. They didn't even cover it. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, you had CNN talking about peaceful protests. Meanwhile, police cars were burning in the background. And that was just one instance. And they called it the Summer of Love. Insane. If that's not propaganda, America, I don't know what is. And you want to know what that leads right into, what you and I were talking about before the show, the mess that's taking place in Minneapolis. It is driven by the demonization of ICE. It's driven by the response to criminal activities. Okay, they say nothing about the fraud and the theft that's occurred in Minneapolis. That's gone by the wayside. All they're talking about is the actions of law enforcement. And granted, there's some rough business taking place, but you never really see what causes some of the reaction from law enforcement. You don't see them getting spit at. You don't see the rocks. You don't see the bricks. You don't see the slurs. And think about why this occurred. Billions, $9 billion, $10 billion, $11 billion stolen from the American taxpayer. Waltz, that mayor out there, Fry, all basically letting it happen. One of my colleagues sounds like she's in on it too, that Omar, okay? It all happens to be a Somalian groups. Who cares who it is? This is America. We don't care what your background is. We don't care what you look like. We don't care what your shade of your skin is. We do care about your actions. Their actions were criminal activities. We go in, and then they find out of the 100+ people they've already arrested for this criminal activity, major theft, half of them are illegals. So ICE comes in to follow up on that, and that's what caused all this. They never talk about how we got here. They do talk about, though, that when the law enforcement comes down, what they're doing. And then, ICE is referred to regularly by these terrible leaders, Tim Waltz in particular, as the Gestapo. The Gestapo, Chuck. So if that's actually in somebody's head that these people are the Gestapo, right? Maybe they are reasonably educated enough to know what the Gestapo actually is and treats them as if they're Gestapo. That's where this is going. And I'll tell you what, this woman, good. Who was shot. Look, terrible tragedy. God Almighty, I wish that didn't happen, and I wish that police officer tried to handle it in a different way. But the guy was hit, okay? We can't say he was run over. The officer was hit by a car that saw him there and very likely deliberately hit him.
She did, definitely. She stepped on the accelerator and hit him.
Yeah.
That's it.
There's no getting around that. We saw all that, okay? His response, I think we all wish it had been less than was, but that's the reaction he had. It deserves to be continually reviewed, okay? I honestly don't know if it was a good shooting or a bad shooting. I didn't like what I saw, but nevertheless, where did this all start? Why did this occur? Who created this environment for this craziness taking place? And it's and you know what? It's the Democrat left-wing leadership, and it occurs here too. It's wrong. This anti-law enforcement needs to be denounced. Anytime law enforcement is hurt or affected or trotted upon, I denounce it. We denounce it. I'd say Republicans denounce it. And if we don't do that in a unified way, this sort of craziness and riots will continue.
We're not a country anymore, Dan. Let me go back to some basic stuff. I got to go back to my first year of law school, constitutional law, con law as we refer to it. It is very clear. We have something, as you're well aware, in the United States Constitution. It's made referenced often as the Supremacy Clause. What that basically says, and it's really in plain English, if any state or local ordinance or any other local state enactment is in conflict with federal law is supreme, rendering the state or local law, in these cases, local sanctuary city council ordinances, absolutely null and void. So, one of the things I've been scratching my head for years now, not just here, for years, how are these sanctuary cities even allowed to exist when they're passing ordinances which are intended to shield criminals in violation of the federal immigration laws? So let's start with that. Let's start with that.
Right. Well, you're absolutely right. We've been talking about this now for years. Sanctuary cities. How do you declare yourself a sanctuary city? So in other words, you're allowing those that are breaking our immigration laws to live freely, to be residents. And even if you're arrested, the local police are not allowed to call immigration and custom enforcement. They're prohibited from doing that. So we've said for many years now, boy, we want to defund. It's like a political thing. We want to defund sanctuary cities. We want to defund sanctuary cities. Well, you know what? President Trump is the only one that's actually trying to do something about it. Particularly, let's also remember how we got here. Joe Biden and the Democrat leadership, it's not just him, allowed, 18 million, 16 million, 21 million illegals.
We'll never know for sure, Dan.
Hundreds on the terrorist watch list, gangs that we had never heard of. Now it's a household name for Trende Aragua and everything else. That's who we've been allowed to come into our country. And then you got the left in our country. Again, many of them brainwashed, but brainwashed by who? Elected officials and the media protesting that we're trying to enforce the law. And I'll tell you what, I was at something just last week, 2 weeks ago now, over at here in Washington, where the president was speaking. I came out and it was Venezuelan protesters unhappy that we took down a declared president. He wasn't the president, a dictator who was known to be the head of a drug cartel, earning billions of dollars selling to United States citizens with fentanyl-laced cocaine primarily. They're out there, hundreds of them protesting. And I'll tell you what, they came after me because we did a little Fox interview while we were standing there. They came after me, and if the police didn't intervene, they were ready to get physically hostile with me. There's no question about it. And what are they out there protecting? A
narco-terrorist.
Yeah,
a narco-terrorist. You can get into the weeds in this, but it needs to be spoken. Here's another example of sanctuary cities in kind of in the general of what you're talking about the criminals and violent criminals. They have an illegal alien. By the way, let me clear something up about the ones that want to correct speech, undocumented. No, the statute says illegal alien. That's what the federal statute says. I'm a lawyer. We're talking about illegal alien, but here's / something else, Dan. Criminals. And you know what's galling and appalling to me? that you have people that violate, in many cases, violent crimes. They get arrested by local police. They get put in jail because they're a danger to the community. But what they then do is they release them right back into the community. And you know why?
Sure.
Because ICE goes to check the jails, and if they're in jail, they'll take them under federal supremacy law, and they don't want them taken. They let them go and release them back to commit murders and rapes against their own citizens. Like, can you explain that to me?
Chuck, it's inexplicable. And Philadelphia, our wonderful city of brotherly love that we truly do love, is right in that category. We have more murders. You know, Chicago is always the sort of the poster city for crime and murders and all. Philadelphia is not far behind. We got a DA down there by the name of Larry Krasner, known as Let Him Go Larry.
A loathsome character, but go ahead.
So true. I mean, a horrible human being. How he gets elected is unbelievable. And he's causing the crime. They prosecute less than 30%, less than 25%. They won't even share their numbers anymore of violent criminals. And when they talk about gun violence, we're talking about many that he lets go are carrying firearms illegally and then letting them go within 24 hours. Guess what? Those are the same people continuing to commit gun violence as they talk about how that needs to be mitigated or eliminated. Their idea is to, take the guns. Well, how about we take the guns from the criminals by prosecuting them?
Well, America is watching, Dan, thankfully. I watched myself, America, last night, 85, 90,000 strong in that stadium, give a tremendous ovation to the President of the United States. And that's the poll I'll go by. We're going to take a short break and come right back. We got a few minutes left in the show. I want to get your thoughts on some editorials that have been written about what's going on in Minneapolis that really capture it well. So we'll be right back.
There are more places you can see the Volpe Report. Watch every Sunday morning at 10:30 on Fox 56 or watch on YouTube at the Volpe Report. More ways to watch. Still the same premier political talk show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians.
Dan, welcome back to the second part. Actually, we should say the fourth quarter because we've already gone through 2 quarters, halftime, and the third quarter. Good stuff, though. I want to, as I said earlier, I have a number of things I read regularly. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, of course, the local papers as well, and certain magazines, National Review, the New Republic from time to time, just to see what the left is talking about. And the Washington Examiner is one of my favorites. I do views on it. And but at any rate, I want to read from an editorial in the Washington Examiner. If the camera can see and you can see, they have a picture of Nicolas Maduro on the cover. But I want to read what the editorial says, and I think it was really important to talk about. So I'll read for about a paragraph or two and then get your comment. Headline: Democratic anti-ICE rhetoric is getting people killed. Then the editorial: the shooting death of Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother of 3, could have easily been avoided. Instead of telling his constituents that the state of Minnesota was at war with the federal government, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Democrat, could have cooperated with federal law enforcement instead of banning federal agents from city property and accusing immigration and customs enforcement officials of, quote, terrorizing his community. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, you referred to as well, could have worked with ICE to ensure federal law was enforced as safely as possible. Instead, Walz, Frey, and countless national Democrats demonize ICE agents at every turn. Walz has called them the Gestapo. Representatives Pramila Jayapal and Delia Ramirez, Democrats, have called ICE, quote, listen to this, Dan, a terrorist organization. And Representative Jasmine Crockett, that crackpot, has compared ICE to, quote, slave controls. Given this rhetoric, is it any surprise that impressionable Democrats and others on the left are taking matters into their own hands? Question mark. Good point to get your comment on what I just read.
Well, everything usually starts at the top, and all this very hateful environment starts at the top by the commentary, by them not denouncing it, by them instigating it. Waltz is as well impeding federal officers from carrying out their law enforcement duties. That's a crime in itself. So that's why he will be investigated. Look, even my my subcommittee on oversight and investigations and financial services, we believe there's all kinds of PPP money that went into that community that's also going overseas. So I'm presently beginning an investigation there. Look, but back to this. It just this sort of rhetoric is hate speak, and frankly, I'm investigating as well right now, seeing about passing a resolution for elected officials, and that would bear responsibility on Congress to denounce elected officials from engaging in hate speak that leads to violence, and that's exactly what's happening.
The entire squad. The same Democratic, leftist, progressive, radical squad with Ocasio-Cortez, who fancies herself a presidential candidate. God help us. When Hamas murdered women and children in Israel and started that war, the press conveniently forgets about what started the conflict between Israel and Palestine and Gaza. And they effectively, I think it was not Ilhan Omar, I think it was the other one, Rashida Tlaib, had something on her congressional office, from the river to the sea, which means the extermination of all the Jews in Israel. You mean that kind of rhetoric?
Yes, it does. That's exactly what it means. Yeah. I mean that kind of rhetoric. Yeah.
Well, no doubt.
That leads to such violence. And, and you were mentioning Iran. I don't want to jump from one subject to the next.
Well, that's where we're going next. So you took us there.
Yeah. But it's all sort of in line, because the left is quite silent on Iran. They're protesting what was done in taking down the worst dictator in all of South America, meaning Maduro. Believe it or not, they're actually questioning the cost. What did it cost to take down Maduro? Can you believe it? And my answer to them was a lot less than the fraud that was committed in Minneapolis.
Yeah, 9 or 10 billion. They don't. How could they not talk about that?
They don't talk about it. The media doesn't pick it up. They only pick up things that serve the leadership and the election opportunities for Democrats. It's propaganda. You can't even refer to it as news. But what's happening in Iran, I think, has very much to do with, and I believe, the strategy of the president, what was done in Venezuela. Okay, this guy's a bad guy, but we perhaps are going to see a domino effect of dictators. Maduro's gone. In Colombia, the dictator there is already changing his ways and trying to warm up to the president. Cuba's being rattled. The people in Iran are seeing that they too could have freedom in their generation, not 50 years from now. And so what we're seeing here is perhaps a domino effect towards freedom, not unlike what happened with Reagan, what Reagan set the stage for in the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. I think it can be actually that significant for just a rollout of freedom and an elimination of dictators. And we're going to do what we can to be supportive of the people of Iran as well.
No doubt. Actually, in the preceding shows I made reference to, our U.S. Senator Dave McCormick actually made, it's ironic, you said the same thing. He made reference to a speech Ronald Reagan gave right by the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, when he said famously to Mikhail Gorbachev, the president of Russia, at that point, the USSR, communist Russia, tear down this wall. And that wall came down. And we finally have the president doing the same thing, Dan.
I'm glad to hear great minds think alike. Dave's a great guy. You know that well.
Yeah. We did a 2-part show, of course, with him, because he couldn't talk about what was classified. But because he sits on Senate Foreign Relations, he's getting briefed by Rubio and John Ratcliffe and Daniel Kaine, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, of course, the president and vice president as well. But
I did as well.
You received those classified briefings? Well, then again, he couldn't talk about that which was classified. But your view then and opinion on, there appears to be a clear policy that we are in fact executing toward a conclusion that will be beneficial to America and our national security. So take it from there.
Listen, General Kaine is unbelievable. He is so good. The hearing, I can tell you this, the classified briefing, all I can say was incredibly honest, truthful, and refreshing. Much different, just real simply, I say this objectively, than we received during the course of the Biden folk. I learned nothing new in the Biden so-called classified hearings. Here, we learned a lot. We learned the detail, we learned the thinking, we learned the strategy, and we learned what the outcomes are and the plan moving forward. And I would just say this, and this was not discussed in the hearing, but I project that the plan is to create a stabilized situation in Venezuela, set the stage for free and fair elections, where who knows, Marie Machado will likely be running. She's a favorite of many, and what I know of her.
The opposition leader that really won the election, and Maduro just didn't recognize it, versus Rodriguez, who is the interim acting.
That's right. That's right. There's a lot of Venezuelans throughout the district who will be watching this show that text me and say, "Hey, look, this can't stand." And I say, I believe, and again, I wasn't discussed this classified. I believe the president has a plan. And one thing people got to keep in mind, the naysayers, where they come in and say, "Oh, this is all about oil, all about oil." Let me tell you something. We have all the oil we need.
Right.
We have all the oil partners. Those who is receiving a tremendous amount of oil from Venezuela is China. So we have just gained tremendous leverage over our adversary. I don't want to call him an enemy. I don't want them to be our enemy. Over our adversary in such an action that can lead to other things where we could perhaps gain their support, maybe when it even comes to Vladimir Putin's position in Ukraine. So there's more thought, process, and strategy going on here than meets the eye.
No doubt. And as we run out of time now, Dan, I'd like to add that the other domino to fall, you talked about the pressure this brings to bear on China that needs Venezuelan oil. They're not going to get right now. The other thing is right there, right off the coast of America, Cuba. Without Venezuelan oil, the country goes dark. And further, without the economic impact and the money that they get from their transactions with Venezuela, Cuba is in an existential position right now, too. We could see the collapse of the Cuban government. Also, another domino. It's going to be pretty interesting to watch the geopolitical consequences of what's going on, thanks to our president and the foreign policy of this administration.
Yeah, you know what? And thank God, when East Germany fell and the wall came down, and I've heard this directly from people that were on the eastern side of that wall, when they crossed over and they saw what was going on, they wept, they cried, because they cannot believe how much they were being lied to, and they couldn't believe the prosperity that was just on the other side of the wall due to Western industrialism, capitalism, freedom. So hopefully the people of Cuba experience the same sooner rather than later.
I just had a thought. You must mean the way the American people are currently getting lied to by the legacy media. You mean that?
Yeah, I do.
Well, at any rate, Congressman.
It's happening. Right.
Thank you so much for your time. I know you're going off to meet with the ambassador of the Dominican Republic. Just stand next to him. It'll probably get warmer than it is in Washington or up here in the northeast of PA. But again, I always say Godspeed on your efforts on our behalf, Congressman. I'll talk to you soon.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Volpe Report podcast. Be sure to visit our YouTube and Facebook pages for upcoming episodes. You can catch up on the Volpe Report podcast on your favorite podcast provider.